The twin suns burned over the alien desert world. The heat was so strong that the ground shimmered like liquid glass. Water was rare here, more precious than gold. And every drop was guarded like treasure in the busy market square of Drellith. Traders shouted prices for goods, spices, and the most valuable of all, water. Among the crowd, a small, thin alien girl moved quietly. Her clothes were torn, her feet bare. And her green skin was covered in dust. Her name was Lyra, and she was dying of thirst. Her lips were cracked, her throat dry. And she could barely think of anything except the sound of water pouring. She walked past a stall where a merchant sold clear flasks filled with cool water. The sight made her heart ache. She looked around. No one seemed to be watching her. Closely, her hand trembled as she reached for a flask. She told herself it was only to live, only to survive one more day. But the moment her fingers closed around the glass, a heavy hand grabbed her wrist. The merchant shouted, and the crowd turned to look. "She's a thief," he yelled, his voice echoing through the square. In seconds, 2 large alien guards rushed forward, their armor shining in the sun. They twisted Lyra's arms behind her back and dragged her to the center of the square. The people gathered quickly, eager for a public punishment here in Drellith. Stealing water was one of the worst crimes. The punishment was cruel. They would cut off the thief's arm as a warning to others. Lyra struggled, but she was weak. Her voice cracked as she tried to explain, "My family. No water. I'm just thirsty," she pleaded. The guards ignored her, tying her to a wooden post. One of them pulled out a long, curved blade that glinted under the sun. From the edge of the crowd, a man was watching. He was human, tall, with sunburnt skin and a rugged look from too many days traveling. His name was Jack, a trader passing through on his way to another colony. He had seen many cruel things in his life, but something about the girl's eyes made him stop. They were wide and full of fear, yet there was also a desperate innocence. In them, the guard raised the blade high, the crowd leaning forward to see the strike. Jack stepped forward, his voice loud and clear. "Stop," he shouted. The sudden command froze the guard mid-swing. Everyone turned to stare at the stranger who had dared to interrupt. The head guard frowned. "This is none of your business, human," he growled. Jack walked closer, his boots crunching. "On the sand, she's just a child," he said. "I'll pay for the water." And whatever else she took, the crowd murmured, surprised at the human's boldness. But the guard shook his head. "Stealing water is a crime against the people," he said. "We cannot be soft, or more will steal." Jack's jaw tightened. He could see the girl trembling, her small hands gripping the ropes. Her lips moved silently. Was she praying, or just begging in her mind? Jack took another step forward. "Then take me instead," he said. The words shocked the crowd into silence. The guard blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "You take her place?" he asked, his tone half mocking. "Yes," Jack replied without hesitation. "I'll take her punishment, but let her go." The crowd erupted into whispers, some laughing at the human's foolishness. From the back, a tall figure appeared, the magistrate of Drellith, robed in gold and red. He looked Jack up and down, a slow smile forming on his face. "This is interesting," the magistrate said. "A human willing to bleed for an alien thief." Jack met his eyes without fear. "Release her," he repeated. The magistrate chuckled. "Oh, I will. If you survive a trial," he said. The crowd cheered at the idea, hungry for entertainment. Lyra's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Jack. She didn't know him, didn't understand why he was doing this. But in that moment, in the heat of the square, with the blade still glinting in the sun, a small spark of hope lit in her heart. The ropes around her wrists were cut, and she stumbled forward. Jack stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. The magistrate raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. "Bring him to the arena," he ordered, his voice carrying across the square like a death sentence. The arena of Drellith was nothing like the smooth sports fields on human colonies. It was a wide circle of scorched sand, surrounded by high stone walls. The air inside felt hotter than the marketplace, trapping the sun's heat like an oven. Crowds filled the stands, cheering and shouting as Jack was pushed into the center. He could feel their eyes on him, hungry for a show. Lyra was somewhere, at the edge, still clutching her empty hands, her face pale with worry. The magistrate stood on a raised platform, his robe shining in the sunlight. "This human wants to take the thief's place," he announced. The crowd laughed, some calling out insults, others betting on how quickly Jack would fall. But the magistrate continued. "Drellith does not give mercy for free." He lifted his hand, and a servant carried forward a heavy clay jug filled with water. "This is your trial," the magistrate said, his voice smooth and cruel. "You will carry this jug across the burning path without spilling a drop." Jack narrowed his eyes. "And if I do?" he asked. "Then the girl goes free." The magistrate replied, "If you fail, both of you suffer the punishment." The burning path was infamous even among Drellith's own people. It was a stretch of sand so hot that boots could melt in minutes. At midday, the heat rose until even metal tools warped and bent. Many who tried to cross collapsed before reaching the other side. Jack looked at the jug. It wasn't just heavy. It was fragile. One wrong step and it would shatter. Wasting the water, he glanced toward Lyra. She didn't speak, but her eyes were wide with fear and a strange trust. It was enough. The trial began with the blast of a horn. Jack lifted the jug and stepped onto the burning path. The sand under his boots was already scorching. Every step felt like walking on fire. Sweat poured down his back, soaking his shirt. The crowd jeered and laughed, some chanting for him too. Fall halfway across, his vision blurred from the heat, his legs shook, and the weight of the jug made his arms ache. He could hear Lyra's faint voice from the stands. "Don't stop," she cried. Jack clenched his jaw, forcing himself to move. A gust of hot wind blew across the path, nearly knocking him off balance. The water inside the jug sloshed dangerously close to the rim. He slowed his steps, focusing on keeping it steady. The end of the path seemed miles away. His skin burned where the sun hit. His boots softened, the soles sticking to the sand. He thought of turning back, but then he saw Lyra's face again in his mind. He thought of her tied to that post, the blade about to fall. He refused to let that be her fate. The last stretch was the hardest. His knees buckled, and he fell to one side, nearly dropping the jug. The crowd gasped, then roared with laughter. Jack gritted his teeth and forced himself up again. Pain shot through his legs, but he ignored it. One more step, then another. The moment his foot touched the cool shadow beyond the path, the crowd fell silent. He had made it. Not a single drop had spilled. The magistrate's smile faded. He had not expected the human to succeed. Lyra covered her mouth, unable to believe it. Jack set the jug down at the magistrate's feet. "Your deal," Jack said between breaths. "Now let her go." The magistrate waved a hand, and the guards untied the rope from Lyra's arms. But his eyes held a glint of warning. "You've earned her freedom today," he said slowly. "But you've made enemies. Human." Jack ignored the threat and stepped toward Lyra. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get you out of here." For a moment, she hesitated. No one had ever risked themselves for her before. She didn't understand why he had done it, but the warmth in his voice told her she could trust him. They walked together toward the gate. The sun still blazed above, but for the first time in years, Lyra felt the weight of fear lift from her shoulders. Behind them, the magistrate watched, already planning what would happen next. Jack thought the worst was over when they walked out of the arena. But freedom in Drellith was never given so easily. The magistrate's smile during the trial had been too calm, too patient. Jack had seen men like him before. The kind who never forgave a public humiliation, and Jack had humiliated him today. That meant trouble was coming. The streets outside the arena were still busy. Merchants called out their prices. Soldiers patrolled in pairs, and the heat still pressed down like a heavy blanket. Jack guided Lyra through the crowd, his eyes scanning for trouble. She stayed close, clutching the edge of his sleeve like she was afraid to let go. Her voice was small when she asked, "Why did you do it?" "You don't even know me." Jack didn't slow his steps. "Because I know what it's like to be left with nothing," he replied. Lyra fell silent. But her eyes stayed fixed on him, studying every word and every step. They reached a quiet side street. Jack wanted to get to his ship before the magistrate could change his mind. But before they could turn the corner, a deep voice called out, "Human." Jack turned slowly, already guessing who it was. 3 armored soldiers stepped into the street, blocking their path. Their leader smirked. "The magistrate says you must complete one final trial before leaving Drellith." Jack's jaw tightened. "I already passed your trial," he said. The soldier shook his head. "That was a game for the crowd," he replied. "This is the real test." The trial was simple in words, but deadly in truth. They were to carry a burning torch through the fire caverns. The torch must stay lit from the entrance to the exit. If the flame went out, they would die in the darkness. The caverns were famous for being a place where heat, smoke, and poisonous gases killed even the strongest warriors. Jack didn't like the sound of it, but refusing meant they'd drag Lyra away, and he wasn't going to let that happen. The soldiers escorted them to the edge of the city. There, a jagged black cliff opened into a narrow tunnel. The heat that poured from it was worse than the burning path. Lyra's steps slowed as they approached. "They'll kill you in there," she whispered. Jack gave her a faint smile. "Then, I guess we better make sure they don't," he said. Inside, the caverns were a nightmare. The walls glowed faint red from the lava rivers below. The air was thick with smoke that stung their eyes and throats. Jack held the torch high, its light flickering against the jagged rocks. Every few steps, the ground shook from underground tremors. They had to walk narrow ledges where one slip would drop them into molten fire. Lyra followed closely, her hand on his back for balance. Her people had always avoided this place. She had never imagined stepping inside it. At one point, a sudden burst of steam shot up from the cracks. The torch flame nearly went out. Jack shielded it with his body, the heat burning his arms. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward. The sound of dripping water echoed through the cavern. It was strange. Water here was rare. But this was no clean spring. A moment later, they saw why. A stream of black, boiling liquid cut across the path. They would have to jump it without losing the torch's flame. Jack took a deep breath. He leaped across, landing hard but steady. The torch shook, but the fire stayed alive. He turned and reached out for Lyra. "Your turn," he said. She hesitated, her eyes wide. "I can't," she whispered. "You can," he said firmly. She gathered her courage and jumped. Jack caught her before she slipped. They kept moving, the heat pressing in like an invisible hand trying to crush them. When they finally saw the faint light of the exit, Lyra almost cried with relief, but their path was blocked by a creature she had only heard of in stories. It was a fire serpent, its scales glowing like molten stone. Its eyes locked on them, and it hissed, steam rising from its fangs. Jack knew fighting it would risk the torch, so he did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed a piece of burning rock from the wall and threw it to the side. The serpent's head snapped toward the noise, giving them a moment to dash past. They burst out of the caverns into the blinding sunlight. The torch's flame still burning strong. The soldiers at the entrance stared in disbelief. Jack shoved the torch into the leader's hands. "Trial complete," he said. They had no choice but to step aside. But Jack could feel their eyes on his back as he and Lyra walked away. This time, he knew for certain the magistrate would not stop here. The sun was lower in the sky now, but the heat still clung to the streets like a heavy blanket. Jack and Lyra moved quickly through the city, avoiding the main roads. Every corner felt dangerous. Every shadow like it could be hiding a soldier. Jack had been in hostile territory before, and he could sense the hunt had already begun. The magistrate had not sent them into the fire caverns just for a test. It was meant to kill them. Surviving had only made them more of a threat in his eyes. Lyra walked beside him, silent for most of the journey. She glanced at him now and then, her expression a mix of gratitude and confusion. Finally, she spoke. "You should have left me. You could have walked away and no one would have stopped you." Jack didn't look at her. "That's not who I am," he said. "I've seen too many people left behind because they were weak, or poor, or alone." Her gaze lowered. "That's my whole life," she whispered. Jack slowed his steps and looked at her. "Not anymore," he said firmly. They reached the edge of the city where the sand stretched endlessly toward the horizon. In the distance, small silhouettes of rock formations and dried riverbeds dotted the land. Jack's ship was hidden miles away, camouflaged among the cliffs. If they could reach it, they'd be safe at least for now. But safety in Drelith was always temporary. Jack knew the magistrate's soldiers could ride faster than they could walk. They had to move fast. They followed a narrow trail between the dunes. The desert air was cooler now, but dry enough to make their lips crack. Jack gave Lyra the last of his water ration. She shook her head at first, but he pressed it into her hands. "Drink," he said. "We'll find more soon." She sipped slowly, as if afraid the water might disappear. For someone who had nearly lost her arm for stealing a single flask, every drop was a treasure. By nightfall, the desert grew cold. Stars filled the sky. Brighter than anything Jack had seen on Earth, they found shelter in a shallow cave. The rocks still warm from the day's sun, Jack started a small fire while Lyra sat close, rubbing her hands together. It was the first time since the market square that she looked relaxed. But the peace didn't last. A faint noise echoed through the night. Jack froze, his hand going to the weapon at his side. It was the sound of hooves, but not from any animal. He knew Lyra's eyes widened. "They're here," she whispered. Jack doused the fire instantly, plunging them into darkness. The hoofbeats grew louder, the sound bouncing off the desert rocks. Shadows moved just beyond the cave's mouth. Jack pulled Lyra against the wall and signaled her to stay quiet. A group of soldiers passed by, their mounts snorting in the cold air. One of them paused, turning toward the cave. Jack held his breath. The soldier scanned the darkness for a long moment, then rode on. Jack waited until the sound faded before speaking. "They're sweeping the desert," he said. "They won't stop until they find us." They left the cave before dawn, moving under the cover of early light. They stayed close to the jagged ridges where the terrain hid them from sight. Lyra pointed out paths only her people knew, old trader routes carved into the rock. Without her, Jack might have taken a slower, more dangerous way. As the day warmed, they saw signs of life. Small desert birds, a trickle of water running. Between stones, Jack filled their flask and let Lyra drink first. She smiled faintly for the first time. "You don't act like the others," she said. "What others?" He asked. "Humans," she replied softly. "The ones who come here don't stay to help." Jack shrugged. "Maybe they never met someone worth helping." He said. By midday, they spotted the cliffs where Jack's ship was hidden. Relief washed over them both, but it was short-lived from the ridge above. A horn sounded long and sharp. Lyra's face went pale. "They found us," she said. Jack grabbed her hand and pulled her into a run. Sand sprayed behind there. Boots as they raced toward the ship in the distance. Armored riders were already descending the dunes. The chase had begun. Jack's ship was close, but so were the soldiers, and in the desert of Drelith, one mistake could mean the end. The riders closed in fast, their mounts leaping down the dunes like predators. The horn blasts echoed across the desert, warning any nearby patrols. Jack tightened his grip on Lyra's hand, pulling her toward the jagged rocks ahead. The cliffs would give them some cover, but the open sand between here and there felt like a death zone. Lyra's breath came in sharp gasps, her small legs struggling to keep pace. Jack slowed just enough to lift her onto his back. Her arms wrapped around his neck as he pushed forward with long, determined strides. Arrows whistled through the air. Striking the sand close to his feet, the riders were shouting, their voices carrying a cruel excitement. Jack zigzagged to make himself a harder target. The ship's hidden landing site was less than a mile away. But a mile in the open desert under enemy eyes felt endless. Lyra buried her face into his shoulder. "Vale, take me back," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jack's reply was steady and certain, "Not while I'm breathing." They reached the base of the cliffs and slipped into a narrow crack between two boulders. The riders dismounted, their boots crunching on the stones as they spread out. Jack set Lyra down and pointed deeper into the passage. "Go," he said. "Softly, stay low, and don't stop unless I tell you." She hesitated, her eyes searching his face. "What about you?" she asked. "I'll be right behind," he promised. But the truth was, he needed to stay behind just long enough to slow their pursuers. As Lyra crawled ahead through the rocks, Jack crouched low, pulling out a small device from his belt. It was an old smoke charge, not powerful, but enough to confuse the enemy for a few minutes. The first soldier came into view, his sword drawn. Jack threw the charge at the ground and a thick cloud exploded upward. The soldier coughed. Stumbling blindly, Jack slipped past him, knocking the blade from his hand before darting deeper into the rocks. The narrow passage opened into a hidden canyon. Lyra was waiting there, crouched behind a large stone. She ran to him the moment she saw him. "You came," she said, relief flooding her voice. "I told you I would." He replied, but their moment of safety ended quickly. More soldiers were climbing down into the canyon from the opposite side. Jack scanned the walls, spotting a narrow ledge halfway up. "If we can get there, we can reach the other side," he said. Lyra nodded without question, trusting him completely. The climb was dangerous, the rock brittle and sharp. Jack went first, pulling Lyra up behind him, below. The soldiers shouted and began their own climb. One of them loosed another arrow. It scraped Jack's arm. Drawing blood, he gritted his teeth and kept climbing. They reached the ledge and moved quickly along it. It ended in a sharp drop into a dried riverbed without pausing. Jack jumped down and caught Lyra as she followed. The riverbed curved toward the cliffs where the ship was hidden for the first time. The end felt close, but just before they reached the final turn, a group of 3 soldiers stepped into their path. They were faster than the ones before, their weapons gleaming in the fading light. Jack pushed Lyra behind him. He fought with swift, precise strikes, knocking one soldier down with a hard punch, disarming the second with a twist of his wrist. The third lunged forward. But Lyra acted before Jack could, grabbing a handful of sand and throwing it into the soldier's eyes. The man roared in pain, giving Jack the opening to slam him into the rocks. Jack turned to Lyra with a quick nod. "Good thinking," he said. She managed a small smile despite her fear. They ran the final stretch, and at last the ship came into view. It was half buried in the sand, its surface blending perfectly with the desert around it. Jack hit the controls on the side panel, and the hatch slid open with a hiss. They scrambled inside as shouts echoed from behind. Jack sealed the hatch and powered the engines. The ship lifted off, sand swirling violently beneath it, through the viewport. They saw the soldiers growing smaller as the desert stretched away. Lyra sank into the seat beside him, her eyes wide as the stars began to replace the burning sky. "We made it," she whispered. Jack glanced at her and gave a faint smile. "For now," he said, because deep down he knew the magistrate's reach didn't end in the desert. The real fight was still ahead. The ship's engines roared as they climbed higher into the darkening sky. Jack kept his hands steady on the controls, watching the desert shrink below. For a moment, it seemed like they were truly free. Lyra sat beside him, clutching the armrest, her eyes still wide from the chase. The glow of the twin suns faded behind them, replaced by the cold light of distant stars. But Jack's instincts told him it wasn't over yet. Freedom never came that easy in places like Drelith. A loud beeping cut through the hum of the engines. Jack checked the display and cursed under his breath. 2 fast-moving ships had locked onto their position. The magistrate's hunters were airborne now. Lyra leaned forward, fear in her voice. "They're following us," she said. Jack nodded. "They won't stop unless we make them." He pushed the throttle, and the ship surged forward. The desert passed beneath them like a blur, but the hunters closed the gap quickly, their smaller crafts built for speed. The CUM system crackled to life. A cold voice spoke, "Surrender." "The girl, human, and you may live." Jack didn't answer, his jaw tightening. Instead, switched off the channel and began plotting a different course. The only way to lose them was to reach the rocky canyons ahead. The narrow paths there were dangerous to fly through. One wrong turn could smash a ship to pieces, but Jack had no other choice. He angled the ship downward. Diving toward the jagged formations, the hunters followed, their engines screaming. Wind howled through the cockpit as the walls of the canyon rose around them. Lyra held onto the seat, her knuckles white. "Can we make it?" she asked. Jack gave a small, confident smile. "Only if we don't slow down," he replied. He weaved the ship between sharp stone pillars, skimming dangerously close. Laser fire from the hunters lit up the canyon walls. One blast grazed the hull, making the ship shudder. Alarms blared, warning of heat buildup in the engines. Jack ignored them, focusing only on the next turn. They burst out into a wider section of the canyon. Jack spotted an opening in the cliff face, a narrow, hidden alcove. He turned sharply and slid the ship inside. Powering down the engines, the sound of the hunters' crafts roared past as they overshot the turn. Jack exhaled slowly. "That'll buy us a minute," he said. But Lyra's eyes were on the scanner. "They're turning back," she said quietly. Jack's expression hardened. "Then we hold them here." He moved to the back of the ship, opening a storage compartment. Inside were a few weapons. Nothing heavy, but enough to fight in close quarters. He handed Lyra a small stun pistol. She hesitated. "I've never point and pull the trigger," he said firmly. "Don't think, just do it." She nodded, gripping it tightly. The sound of engines returned, growing louder. A shadow passed over the entrance of the alcove. Then a burst of gunfire tore into the rock above them. Jack returned fire from the hatch, forcing the hunters to scatter. One of their ships landed on the sand outside, and armored soldiers poured out. Jack moved quickly, using the rocks for cover. Lyra stayed low, peeking over a crate as one soldier rushed toward them. She fired. The stun blast hit his chest, dropping him instantly. Her eyes widened in shock, but Jack only shouted, "Good, keep it up." The fight was brutal in the tight space. Jack took down 2 more soldiers with precise shots, but more kept coming, their armor glinting under the ship's lights. One soldier made it past Jack and lunged toward Lyra. She stumbled back, fumbling. With the pistol, before he could strike, Jack slammed into him from the side. Knocking him out cold, the remaining soldiers began to retreat. Signaling to their ship, Jack took the chance and ran back to the cockpit. Powering the engines. Hold. On. He shouted. The ship lifted off in a burst of sand and heat. The hunters fired after them, but Jack's sharp turns and quick climbs took them out of range. Finally, the radar cleared. No more pursuers. Lyra sagged in her seat, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Jack glanced at her and gave a small nod. "You did good back there," he said. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "I just didn't want you to do it alone," she replied. But even as the stars opened up ahead, Jack knew this wasn't the end. The magistrate had lost them tonight, but he would send more hunters, and they would have to be ready. The stars stretched endlessly outside the cockpit. Jack kept the ship steady, letting the engines hum at a quiet, steady pace, for the first time since the marketplace. There was no sound of pursuit, no blaring alarms, no flashing red lights. Lyra sat in the co-pilot's seat, still holding the stun pistol loosely in her lap. Her eyes stayed fixed on the view beyond the glass. She had never seen so many stars so close. In her village, the skies were beautiful, but always viewed through a haze of heat and dust. Here, in the quiet of open space, they felt alive. She didn't speak for a long time, but when she did, her voice was soft. "Is it over?" she asked. Jack glanced at her and shook his head slowly. "For now," he said. "But the magistrate won't forget this." Her lips pressed together, and she turned her gaze back to the stars. Jack could see the weight in her expression. The truth that even in safety, fear still lingered. He leaned back in his seat. "I know somewhere we can go," he said. "A place where the magistrate's reach won't find us." Lyra tilted her head. "Curious. Where?" she asked. Jack smiled faintly. "A friend's colony, small, hidden, and full of people who know how to disappear." The journey took hours, and during that time, Lyra began to relax. Jack shared bits of his own story, telling her about the years he spent moving between planets, trading goods, fixing broken machines, and occasionally getting into trouble when he couldn't keep quiet. She listened quietly, sometimes asking questions. It was the first time anyone had spoken to her like she was worth knowing. In return, she told him about her family, how her village's well had dried up, how her parents had gone to find how her parents had gone to find water and never returned. Jack listened without interrupting. When she finished, he simply said, "You deserved better than that." The words were simple, but they meant more to her than she could say. Finally, the nav system beeped, announcing they were nearing their destination. A small green and blue planet came into view. Surrounded by a thin ring of pale ice, Jack began the descent, guiding the ship through a thick layer of clouds until the land below appeared. It was lush, with rolling hills, clear rivers, and forests that stretched to the horizon. Lyra's eyes widened. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jack grinned. "Better than a dessert, huh?" They landed near a cluster of wooden houses built along the edge of a wide river. Children ran to see the new arrivals, their laughter carrying through the air. A tall woman stepped forward from the crowd, smiling warmly. "Jack," she called. "You're late." Jack laughed. "Ran into a little trouble on the way," he replied, glancing at Lyra. "This is Lyra," he said. "She's with me now." The woman's smile softened as she looked at the girl. "You're safe here," she said gently. For the first time in years, Lyra felt those words might be true. She followed Jack into one of the houses, the scent of fresh bread filling the air. They were given food, water, and a small room with a real bed. Lyra sat on it, running her hands over the blanket like it was made of gold. Jack leaned against the doorway, watching her. "You can stay as long as you want," he said. She looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to thank you." Jack shook his head. "You don't have to," he replied. "Just live over the next few days." Lyra began to smile more. She helped with small chores around the village, learned names, and even joined the children by the river. Jack stayed close, but he let her find her own space. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold, she walked up to him. "I think I can breathe again," she said quietly. Jack looked at her and smiled. "That's the point," he replied. They stood in silence for a while, watching the river flow. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both knew they were no longer just strangers thrown together by chance. They were something more, a strange, unexpected family born from the dust and fire of Drellith. And as the stars began to appear above, Jack made a silent promise to himself. No matter where they went, no matter what came next, Lyra would never be thirsty, hunted, or alone again.